Hey, what's going on everyone? Welcome back to the Rugby Muscle YouTube channel. I'm TJ and we're bringing you video 3 in our series of the Rugby Physical Preparation Pyramid. Today we're going to finally get into some nitty gritty of training and of our physical components that we want to improve with rugby. If you haven't seen the first two videos, I suggest you stop this, go back and watch those first, because it's really important that you get the context of this stuff before we get into the nitty gritty. Otherwise it's just going to fail on you. You really need to make sure that you understand the foundation, understand what all of this is about and the limitations that it has before we get into this, and before you either gloss over something that's really important, overlook something that's really important, or you overvalue the importance of this stuff. Because really, rugby strength and conditioning is general. All of the stuff that we do for strength and conditioning, everything that we do in the gym is general in nature. It gives you the ability and the potential to become a better rugby player, but it's not something that is going to directly affect you in a game. It's stuff that gives you the potential to perform better in a game, but it is limited, and I think we have to acknowledge that. And once we do acknowledge that, it opens up the understanding of this pyramid, and opens up the potential and the actual really all the good stuff that you can get out of doing a really good rugby strength and conditioning program. Because sometimes it gets lost when we look in overly functional stuff, and all we focus on is special strength stuff, and we do stuff that's at the top of the pyramid that has no business in a training program for someone that doesn't have any sort of muscle mass, or they are very aerobically weak. Challenging someone that has got no aerobic capacity whatsoever with a mental toughness challenge isn't going to improve them at rugby. And that's just one example of all the limitations of this stuff and why this pyramid is set out the way it is. So if you haven't watched the first video, go back and watch that. Otherwise, let's get into our first bout of training components. So for level 1, we're talking about really general stuff. I know I said rugby strength conditioning in its nature is general. This is the stuff that is the most general out of all of those stuff. If you got really good at these, and these directly affected your performance, and these directly made you a better rugby player, marathon runners, bodybuilders, and gymnasts or Olympic weightlifters would be at the top of rugby. Now, obviously they're not. Obviously marathon runners aren't the best rugby players, but I would argue that those guys do have the best foundation to build upon a rugby physique. Likewise, and more importantly, you will have the foundation to build a better rugby physical performance and a better rugby body if you take care of these things to the most potential that you can. And the bigger this stuff is, and the more that you improve this stuff, the more potential you have elsewhere. This isn't to say, and this is why the pyramid is there, this isn't to say that just working on these stuff is going to continually improve you as a player. That's why the other stuff is there in the first place. But typical me, I'm kind of rambling here. So let's get into this. So aerobic capacity is really important because it supports your ability to produce those high efforts that you do in rugby. So in rugby, more often than not, it's about lots of high intensity actions, 5 to 15 seconds at most, and then you get a long period of rest. If you've got a good aerobic system, your heart is efficient. It's not too much to do with the lungs. It's very much to do with your ability of the heart to flush out that fatigued muscle, with the lactic acid, with the carbon dioxide in the blood. Flush that fatigued blood out of the muscle and get in nice fresh blood. Likewise, that effort in itself and that system in itself also continually supplies your muscles with oxygenated blood to support that low intensity effort that you'll do for the other 95% of a game of rugby. Most of rugby is spent walking, jogging slowly, or standing still. If you can do that efficiently and it doesn't affect you at all, and if you've got a strong aerobic system, you're going to play better. Likewise, if you don't have a strong aerobic system, just doing too much jogging at a low level is going to fatigue you, which reduces your ability to perform in those high intensity actions. Therefore, we really need to make sure that our aerobic capacity and our aerobic system is working for us. That's why it's at the base of the pyramid. Next, we've got hypertrophy. Hypertrophy. This isn't an award that you get for being the most jacked person. Being the most jacked person is a reward in itself. Because you've got more tissue, it just simply gives you more potential to be stronger, more powerful, even faster, because you've got more tissue to contract, to produce force into the ground, produce force whichever way you want, which is going to give you the ability or the potential to have a greater ability at absolute strength, speed and power. All these other different movements are going to be facilitated by having more muscle. That more muscle also gives you more mass, which is going to, in general, help you and support you in contact situations, because your opponent has to literally deal with more mass. And, you could argue that just building fat upon that is going to do the same thing. Yes, but obviously you're not in control of that fat as you would be if you had more muscle. You're going to be more in control of your mass if more of that mass is muscle. So it's all about giving you a lot of potential. It also potentially can make you more robust, make you more averse to injury. Now, that's not to say that being massive is a solution to everything, but getting stronger in certain muscle groups is definitely going to help reduce your injury risk in certain joints, help keep that in play. It's also finally going to give you some potential to store more muscle glycogen, which means more energy. Now, you might have to use up that muscle glycogen a lot more because you've got more mass to carry around, but it's a theory that I figured it would be worth throwing out there, and so I just did. And then finally, we've got movement control. So all your movement control is essentially about how efficiently you move. And that is going to make you an effective rugby player, because if you can efficiently move and change direction, or efficiently sprint because you've got good mechanics, or efficiently move into a ruck or a tackle situation, you're going to be able to do that faster. Okay, so then you can either beat your opponent to the point of contact or to a situation, or you can get to a situation wherever you need to in a defensive line, or you can react to an opponent stepping faster. But it's also going to make you more effective at those, because you can then adjust a lot quicker. You're also more efficient at adjusting, so then you're faster to make those adjustments, etc. But also on top of all of that, it's going to help your endurance, because each movement is more efficient, which means it's less fatiguing on the muscles. If you can change direction like that on a sixpence, and you can move into the direction you want to go, it's going to be far less fatiguing than if you move and you take like an 18-wheeler sort of long-term, slow change of direction. That's going to be more fatiguing. So the better you move in general is going to give you the potential, again, to express your strength, win collisions, get to the places you need to be. But it's also going to make you fitter, because you're going to effectively move and not waste so much energy because you've moved efficiently. Now, I've argued the case for all of these 3 points. Let's talk about how we're going to train them. Kind of becoming obvious now as to why this stuff often gets glossed over. It's because this stuff is the simple stuff. It's not overly glamorous, it's not overly fun, but this is the stuff. And like any grandiose structure, right? The base isn't the stuff that you look at, isn't the amazing stuff that makes the pictures, or is the amazing stuff about architecture. That's all done. That's all the fun, funky stuff is put in place afterwards, and it can only be there because of having a real strong base. Okay, so it's really important that we focus on this non-fancy stuff to get good improvements, and we understand that this stuff is important, and we actually train these components. With this, you do have a lot of flexibility, and so it shouldn't take too long to talk about all the different ways, because there are literally millions of different ways that you can do this stuff. So for aerobic capacity, you're really targeting the heart. You're not worrying too much about the muscle, as we'll get into it here in a second, but you're really focusing on the heart and its ability to improve. So you want to work a heart rate between 120 to 140 beats per minute. I'd call that like a 6 or a 7 out of 10. If it's something whilst you're just trying to measure and gauge whilst you're working, it should be something where you can kind of hold a conversation, but you'll be breathing fairly heavy throughout. You can still hold a conversation, but it's slightly impacted by your breath. You're not so gassed that you can't talk. Likewise, you can't just talk and ramble like I'm doing on this video. You can achieve this in a number of different ways. Again, you can do this continuously and just do low intensity, steady state, even on the elliptical, and that has its place, and that can actually improve your ability to play rugby, particularly if your aerobic capacity is holding you back. However, that stuff can get kind of boring, right? And so we like to work intervals or circuit training in order to achieve this, but it's not to say it's overly superior to continuous stuff. It just allows us to work on other goals at the same time. So circuit training, we can work different movements. We do, however, need to make sure that we don't get carried away and we keep our heart rate in the given rep ranges. We can also do intervals, and tempo work is fantastic for this, where we can work on different elements of our rugby game at the same time. And as long as we keep our heart rate in the right range and we work from anywhere 20 to 60 minutes, we'll be able to get a really good improvement in our aerobic capacity from training this way. Final thing on this is that you can work off feet conditioning, because again, we're targeting the heart. And that can come in real good handy during a season where you're doing a lot of running and you're doing, you're getting a high impact stuff, and you can take away the impact by doing this training this way. Or you can come at it from the other way and try and work on your footwork, try and work on your sprinting and your running ability, because you need to do that as a rugby player whilst also working on your aerobic capacity. Again, tempo stuff, tempo work, look that up. That is going to be a really good way to hit your aerobic capacity whilst also improving in other areas. Speaking of which, you can also do your circuits and have hypertrophy circuits whilst keeping in the right heart rate range, because hypertrophy can be achieved in, again, millions of different ways. All that you really need to make sure is that you're working probably between 10 and 20 sets of any resistance that gives you a hit and failure in between this given rep range, probably working 2 to 3 sessions a week to get the most amount of hypertrophy. This can be done with compound work. I would suggest doing the compound work heavier, simply because if you do isolation work heavier, you're more at risk of injury. And likewise, if you're doing 20 reps of a compound movement like squats, your lungs are probably going to give out before the muscle does. So really make sure you understand why you're training and why you're doing these different movements. If it's for hypertrophy, then you need to make sure that the muscle is what is given out when you have to finish a set. Again, as long as you're targeting the given muscles, and as long as you're getting enough quality work, and as long as you are recovering, which means your nutrition and your recovery is taken care of, and you're given enough time between sessions, you're going to be able to grow. Hypertrophy is kind of a result of targeted training. It's not something that your body actually adapts in order to achieve. It's kind of a weird goal. It's like your body will create more muscle in order to get stronger if you give it enough fuel and if you give it enough volume and stimulus. But it's not something that is overly targeted, and it can be you can absolutely, like with aerobic work, can train other components whilst also working on your hypertrophy, and whilst also, like, as long as you're fueling enough, you're going to get bigger, which will give you the potential in all of those areas. And again, the same thing can also be said for movement control. Movement control in general, you will be looking at different pushing, pulling, squatting, hinging, lunging, rotation variations. Likewise for rugby, when you're on the field, you're looking at jumping, running, stepping, either in straight, linear, or in multi-directional variations. You're going to look at all of that sort of stuff. You're going to look at a low complexity, so real simple movements first, and real low intensity. Really make sure that you hammer that stuff home. Make sure that you start to move efficiently. As you increase your ability to move and you increase your efficiency, then you would slowly add in intensity, either by trying to move faster, either trying to move more weight. Once you've added in that intensity, then you can also look to add in complexity. So then maybe you're running and then stepping, or maybe you're jumping and then running, or maybe you're squatting and pushing at the same time by doing Olympic lifts, this sort of stuff. But really make sure that you don't build in the intensity and build in the complexity before you've really established some quality movement. Look at gymnasts and Olympic weightlifters. they move fantastically, yet they still don't always do the clean and jerk heavy every single day. They'll break their technique down at a low intensity, at a low complexity, and work on all of those little movements and build up to the ability to add in that weight and add in the complexity over time. So again, there's so much scope and flexibility with this stuff. It's really difficult to like say this is the exact movement that you should do, but all these different variations sort of interlink, and that's why movement control is like movement control can definitely be done with any of the other things on the pyramid. And hypertrophy and aerobic capacity can both be done with other methods or other training components of the pyramid, because they are all so general in nature. But you do need to make sure that you don't miss the forest through the trees here. You really need to make sure that you hit these components in order to train these components. Some people will get carried away and they can do, maybe they do 5 reps and they only get 5 sets in each week because they go so heavy and it takes them so much time. You know, but if you're doing that, then you're not going to give yourself the volume required to build that muscle. So then maybe it's a simple case of adding a few sets of isolation afterwards. Likewise, if you're doing a interval training and you're looking at your movement ability and you're thinking, right, I want to do this to increase my aerobic capacity, you really need to make sure that you don't get carried away with the intensity or with any sort of interval training with the intensity and pushing yourself too hard, where you get out of this heart rate range, because then you're going to be out of that range and you're not going to improve your heart's ability to flush that blood out, pump that blood around the body. And essentially what you're doing is you're hypertrophying the heart. You're building out a stronger heart, keeping it in this range. If you go too hard, you're going to burn the heart out. You're going to have to stop your session sooner than you need to, and therefore you don't work on these components. So really make sure that you don't miss the forest through the trees with this stuff. But in general, that is level 1. That is the human part of building the rugby athlete, the rugby physical preparation pyramid. Hopefully all of that makes sense. Any questions, of course, ask them below. Give it a thumbs up, as this series is something I really do think rugby players need to see, particularly our non-professional athletes, because this stuff is vitally important for you guys. The more you can improve at this stuff, the better you're going to be as a rugby player, and the more potential you have as a rugby player and as an athlete to improve in all of those other areas. Give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, ask any questions below, and I'll see you guys in the next one.